The man smiled again. Detective Ryan Cole stared through the thick glass inside Grayford State Prison. The room smelled like old coffee, wet concrete, and cold metal. The lights above buzzed softly. Chains rattled somewhere far down the hallway. Across the table sat Daniel Reeves. For 3 straight days, detectives had asked him questions about the missing people from Ashwood County. 3 days of interviews. 3 days of lies.
Dispatch to all units, be on the lookout for a juvenile male, approximately 5 feet tall, wearing a yellow raincoat. Last seen near the County Line Road.
He smiled.
Look at the mud on the pedal.
Footage.
It's fresh.
He smiled.
He must have come through here just before the storm hit.
Even when Detective Maria Torres slammed her hand on the metal table and called him a monster, Daniel only leaned back in his chair and smiled wider. It was the kind of smile that made the room feel colder. "Tell us where the others are," Maria said. Daniel slowly folded his hands together. "You still don't get it." Ryan watched carefully. Daniel never blinked much. That bothered him more than the smile. The prison guard near the door shifted nervously. Then Ryan opened a thin brown folder. Inside was one single photograph. He slid it across the table. Daniel glanced at it lazily at first. Then everything changed. The smile disappeared. Not slowly. Instantly. His face turned pale. His eyes locked onto the picture like he had seen a ghost. Maria noticed it too. Ryan leaned closer. "You know him, don't you?" Daniel swallowed hard. For the first time in days, his fingers shook. The room became silent. Even the buzzing lights sounded louder now. Daniel stared at the photograph again. His breathing became uneven. "No," he whispered. Maria's eyes narrowed. "That name scares you." Ryan quietly spoke the words that changed everything. "Who is Jonathan Mercer?" Daniel suddenly stood up so fast the chair crashed backward onto the floor. The prison guard rushed forward. Daniel's smile was completely gone now. "Get that picture away from me," he shouted. Ryan and Maria exchanged stunned looks. Because this was the first real emotion Daniel Reeves had shown during any interrogation. Fear. Real fear. Daniel backed into the corner of the room, breathing hard. Sweat rolled down his forehead. "You don't understand," he whispered. "You should have left that name buried." Maria slowly stepped closer. "Buried where?" Daniel looked toward the security camera in the corner of the room. Then he whispered something so quietly Ryan almost missed it. "He's still watching." Suddenly, every light inside the interrogation room went dark. The prison hallway exploded with shouting. Alarms screamed through the building. For one terrifying second, nobody moved. Then emergency backup lights flashed red across the room. The prison guard grabbed his radio. "Control. Control, respond." Only static answered back. Ryan turned toward Daniel. But Daniel Reeves was smiling again. And this time, the smile was worse. Because the handcuffs hanging from his wrists were open. 3 months earlier, before the blackout, before the screaming alarms, before Jonathan Mercer's name entered the case, Detective Ryan Cole thought this would be a simple missing persons investigation. He was wrong. It started in the small town of Ashwood, deep in the forests of Oregon. The town had one gas station, one diner, and one prison sitting just outside the woods like a giant concrete block. Grayford State Prison. Most people in Ashwood avoided talking about it, especially at night. Ryan arrived there after a local teenager named Emily Dawson disappeared while walking home from her part-time job at Miller's grocery store. No witnesses. No struggle. No body. Only her bicycle lying beside the road. The strange thing was this. The bike was perfectly clean. Not one scratch. It looked carefully placed there. Ryan remembered standing beside the road that first night while rain poured through the trees. Sheriff Tom Bennett smoked quietly beside him. "You think somebody took her?" Ryan asked. Tom nodded slowly. "This town's hiding something." At first, Ryan believed it was just another kidnapping case. Then another person vanished. Then another. 3 disappearances in 11 days. All near Grayford Prison. That was when Daniel Reeves' name first appeared. Daniel had already been serving life in prison for armed robbery and kidnapping. Guards described him as calm, polite, and strange. Very strange. He spent most of his time drawing maps. Not treasure maps. Maps of the woods around Ashwood. When prison officers searched his cell, they found dozens of them hidden under his mattress. And on every single map, one place was circled over and over again. Blackwood Cabin. The cabin sat deep inside the forest nearly 10 miles from the prison. Abandoned. Forgotten. Or at least that's what everyone thought. Ryan and Maria drove there during a stormy evening. The dirt road was muddy and broken. Trees leaned over the path like giant shadows. When they finally reached the cabin, Maria frowned. "The door's open," she whispered. Rain hit the roof loudly as Ryan pulled his flashlight from his jacket. Inside, the cabin smelled rotten. Dust covered the floor. But something felt wrong. Because someone had been there recently. Fresh boot prints crossed the wooden floorboards. Ryan followed them slowly toward the back room. Then he froze. Written across the wall in huge black letters were 6 words. He should not have said the name. Maria stepped beside him. "Ryan." But she wasn't looking at the wall anymore. She was staring down at the floor. Ryan pointed his flashlight lower. And his blood ran cold. Because lying beneath the dusty wooden table was Emily Dawson's missing backpack. Still wet with fresh rain. And beside it, a second backpack they had never seen before. Ryan slowly stepped toward the second backpack. Rain hammered against the cabin roof so hard it sounded like rocks falling from the sky. The old wooden walls creaked in the wind. Somewhere outside, a tree branch snapped loudly in the dark forest. Maria kept her flashlight aimed at the back window. "Tell me that's not fresh mud," she whispered. Ryan looked down. Fresh muddy footprints led away from the backpacks and deeper into the cabin. Someone had been there recently. Very recently. Ryan carefully unzipped Emily Dawson's backpack first. Inside were school papers, a broken phone charger, and a small silver necklace. Maria recognized it immediately. Her mother said she never took that necklace off. Ryan nodded quietly. Then he opened the second backpack. Inside was a dirty prison uniform. Grayford State Prison. Maria frowned. How did a prison uniform get out here? Ryan unfolded the shirt carefully. Printed on the inside collar was a faded number. Inmate 44,291. Ryan's face tightened. Daniel Reeves. Lightning flashed outside the cabin windows. For 1 second, bright white light filled the room. And Ryan noticed something else. There were scratches on the wooden floor. Long scratches. Like something heavy had been dragged across it. Maria saw them too. Both detectives followed the marks slowly across the room until they stopped near an old bookshelf. Ryan pushed against it carefully. The shelf moved. Behind it was a narrow staircase leading underground. Cold air drifted upward from the darkness below. Maria looked uneasy. "Please tell me we're calling backup first." But before Ryan could answer, they heard a sound from below. A soft metallic clang. Like chains moving. Then silence. Ryan pulled his gun carefully. "Stay behind me." The staircase groaned beneath their feet as they descended into the darkness. Their flashlights shook slightly in their hands. The underground room smelled damp and rotten. Water dripped somewhere nearby. Then the light landed on the walls. Maria gasped softly. Photographs. Dozens of them. Pictures of missing people covered the concrete walls. Some photos were old and faded. Others looked recent. Every victim stared blankly at the camera. Under each picture was a date. Ryan's stomach tightened. Some dates went back nearly 20 years. "This can't be one person," Maria whispered. Then Ryan noticed one photograph placed higher than the others. A man wearing glasses. Dark hair. Serious eyes. Underneath the photo were 2 words written in black marker. Jonathan Mercer. Ryan stared at the name. The same name that had terrified Daniel Reeves during the interrogation months later. But this photo was old. Very old. Dust covered the frame. Maria stepped closer. "Who is he?" Ryan didn't answer. Because he had just noticed something even worse. Under Jonathan Mercer's photograph was a list of names. And beside some of those names were check marks. Emily Dawson's name was on the list. No check mark. Yeah. Suddenly, footsteps thundered above them. Both detectives spun around. The cabin door upstairs slammed shut. Ryan grabbed his radio. "Sheriff Bennett, do you copy?" Only static answered. Maria whispered, "We're not alone." Then the basement lights suddenly turned on. Bright white light flooded the underground room. Ryan raised his gun instantly. A speaker crackled somewhere overhead. Then a calm male voice filled the basement. "You were not supposed to find this place." Ryan's heart pounded. The voice sounded old. Controlled. Almost emotionless. Maria looked around wildly. "Who are you?" The voice ignored her. Instead, it said something that made Ryan's blood run cold. "Detective Cole, your father came here once too." Ryan froze completely. Nobody in Ashwood knew about his father. Nobody. His father had disappeared when Ryan was 11 years old. The case was never solved. The voice continued. "He asked the same questions you're asking now." Ryan's hands trembled slightly. Maria looked shocked. "Ryan, what is he talking about?" Before Ryan could answer, the lights went dark again. A loud metal door slammed somewhere inside the basement. Then came the sound of running footsteps. Ryan and Maria rushed toward the noise. At the end of the underground hallway, they found another room. Inside were chains bolted to the walls. An old camera. A stained mattress. And sitting on the floor in the corner, Emily Dawson. Alive. She looked terrified. Her hands shook violently as she stared at them. Ryan rushed forward. "Emily, it's okay. We're police." But Emily suddenly grabbed his arm tightly. Her eyes filled with panic. "You have to leave," she whispered. Maria knelt beside her. "You're safe now." Emily shook her head harder. "No," she whispered. "You don't understand." Then she pointed toward the hallway behind them. Ryan slowly turned around. At the far end of the corridor stood a tall figure wearing a dark prison guard uniform. The man's face was hidden in shadow. But one thing was clear. He was smiling. And hanging from his hand was Sheriff Tom Bennett's bloody badge. Ryan's heart nearly stopped when he saw Sheriff Bennett's badge swinging from the man's hand. The underground hallway felt colder suddenly. Nobody moved. The tall prison guard stood perfectly still beneath the flickering basement lights. His face remained hidden in darkness, but the smile on his lips seemed almost too wide. Emily Dawson started crying quietly behind Ryan. "That's him," she whispered. "That's the man from the woods." Maria raised her gun immediately. "Drop the badge. Hands where I can see them." The man laughed softly. Not loudly. Not wildly. Just a calm little laugh that echoed through the hallway. Then he took one slow step forward into the light. Ryan felt his stomach twist. Because he recognized him instantly. Officer Malcolm Grady. One of Grayford Prison's senior guards. Ryan had spoken with him twice during the investigation. Malcolm always seemed polite. Quiet. Helpful. But now his eyes looked empty. Like there was nothing human left behind them. "Where's Sheriff Bennett?" Ryan demanded. Malcolm tilted his head slightly. "You're asking the wrong question." Maria tightened her grip on her weapon. "Last warning." But Malcolm only smiled wider. Then he said something strange. "Did Daniel finally hear the name?" Ryan froze. "The name scared him, didn't it?" Malcolm continued softly. "I told Jonathan that would happen one day." Ryan's pulse pounded in his ears. "Who is Jonathan Mercer?" he shouted. For the first time, Malcolm's smile weakened slightly. Almost like hearing the name made him uncomfortable too. But before he could answer, the basement lights suddenly shut off again. Darkness swallowed the hallway. Emily screamed. Footsteps exploded through the corridor. Ryan grabbed his flashlight while Maria rushed toward the sound. "Stop!" she yelled. A metal door slammed somewhere ahead. Then silence. The lights flickered back on. Malcolm Grady was gone. Ryan cursed under his breath and ran down the hallway, but the guard had disappeared into the maze beneath the cabin. There were too many tunnels. Too many exits. It was like someone had built an entire hidden prison underground. Maria returned beside Ryan with Emily wrapped in a blanket. "She's freezing," Maria said. "We need to get her out of here now." Ryan nodded, though his mind raced with questions. Who was Jonathan Mercer? Why did Daniel Reeves fear him? And how did Malcolm Grady know about Ryan's missing father? Outside, the storm finally began to calm as police cars flooded the cabin area. Flashing red and blue lights bounced across the wet forest trees. Paramedics helped Emily into an ambulance. Sheriff Bennett was nowhere to be found. Neither was Malcolm Grady. Ryan stood silently beside the ambulance while Emily stared blankly at the forest. Maria approached carefully. "You okay?" Ryan shook his head slowly. "No." He looked toward the dark woods. "My father disappeared near this same prison 20 years ago." Maria looked stunned. "You think it's connected?" Ryan didn't answer immediately, because deep down, he already knew it was. The next morning, Grayford Prison went into full lockdown. Every inmate was searched. Every guard questioned. News helicopters circled overhead while reporters crowded outside the prison gates. Inside the prison, fear spread quickly. Rumors traveled from cell to cell. Some inmates whispered about hidden tunnels under the prison. Others whispered about a man nobody was supposed to talk about. Jonathan Mercer. Ryan sat inside the prison records room surrounded by dusty files stacked across metal tables. Maria entered carrying 2 coffees. "You need sleep," she said. Ryan ignored the coffee. Jonathan Mercer worked at Grayford 22 years ago. Maria frowned. "As what?" Ryan slid over an old employee photograph. "Prison psychologist." The photo showed a man in his 40s with neat hair, glasses, and cold eyes. The same man from the photograph underground. Maria studied the file carefully. "It says he died in a prison fire." Ryan nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's what the report says." Maria looked at him. "You think it's fake?" Ryan pulled another document from the folder. A missing persons report. Filed 20 years earlier. Victim, Detective Samuel Cole. Ryan's father. Last known location, Grayford State Prison. Maria's face tightened. Ryan spoke quietly. "My father came here investigating inmate disappearances inside the prison." Maria looked confused. "Inmates were disappearing?" Ryan nodded. "No bodies. No escape records. They just vanished." He opened another page. Across the bottom was a handwritten note from his father. "If anything happens to me, investigate Jonathan Mercer." Maria slowly sat down. "This whole place is rotten," she whispered. Before Ryan could answer, prison alarms suddenly blared through the building. Both detectives jumped to their feet. A terrified prison officer burst into the records room. "You need to come now." Ryan frowned. "What happened?" The officer's face looked pale. "It's Daniel Reeves." Minutes later, Ryan and Maria rushed through the prison hallways filled with shouting guards and screaming inmates. When they reached cell block D, several officers stood frozen outside Daniel's cell. Nobody wanted to step closer. Ryan pushed through them. Then he saw why. Written across the cell walls in dark red letters were the words, "He knows you remembered him." Daniel Reeves sat quietly in the corner, smiling again. But Ryan barely noticed him. Because hanging from the ceiling above Daniel's bed was Sheriff Tom Bennett's body. And carved into the wall beside it were 4 horrifying words. "Ryan Cole is next." The entire prison block fell silent. Even the inmates stopped shouting. Ryan stood frozen outside Daniel Reeves' cell while red emergency lights flashed across the concrete walls. Sheriff Bennett's body swayed slowly from the ceiling. Maria covered her mouth in shock. Several prison guards looked sick. But Daniel Reeves only smiled from the corner of the cell. That same horrible smile. Ryan stepped forward carefully, rage burning inside him. "How did this happen?" he shouted. Nobody answered. Because the cell had been locked the entire time. No guard had entered. No cameras showed anyone going inside. Yet somehow Sheriff Bennett was dead. and Daniel Reeves sat there like he had been waiting for them. Maria forced herself to stay calm. "Get Bennett down. Now." Officers rushed into the cell carefully while Ryan stared at the message carved into the wall. "Ryan Cole is next." His chest felt tight. Daniel suddenly chuckled softly. Ryan turned sharply. "What's so funny?" Daniel looked up slowly. "You finally see it now." Ryan grabbed the bars tightly. "See what?" Daniel leaned closer. "This prison doesn't keep people inside." His voice dropped to a whisper. "It keeps something else hidden." Maria stepped beside Ryan. "Where's Malcolm Grady?" Daniel's smile faded slightly at the name. "He's scared now," he said quietly. "Jonathan never wanted outsiders involved." Ryan's anger exploded. "Jonathan Mercer is supposed to be dead." For the first time, Daniel looked genuinely nervous again. His eyes shifted toward the security cameras above the cell. Then he whispered, "That's what he wants you to believe." The hallway lights suddenly flickered. Several guards looked around nervously. Then every prison cell door on the block unlocked at once. Clang, clang, clang. The sound echoed like gunshots. Inmates immediately began screaming. Some rushed into the hallways. Others started fighting. Prison alarms screamed through the building again. "Lockdown breach!" someone shouted over the speakers. Maria grabbed Ryan's arm. "We have to move." But Daniel Reeves remained seated calmly inside his open cell. Almost like he had been expecting this. Ryan stared at him. "You planned this?" Daniel slowly shook his head. "No," he whispered. Then his eyes lifted toward the ceiling. "He did." Suddenly the prison lights shut off completely. Darkness swallowed the block. Chaos erupted instantly. Inmates screamed. Guards shouted orders. Metal doors slammed somewhere nearby. Then came the sound that made Ryan's blood run cold. Footsteps. Slow footsteps. Walking calmly through the darkness. One step at a time. Closer. Closer. Maria raised her flashlight quickly. The beam cut through the dark hallway. But nobody was there. Then the prison speakers crackled loudly. Static hissed for several seconds. Finally, a calm voice spoke. "Good evening, Detective Cole." Ryan froze. The voice sounded calm. Intelligent. Older. "Jonathan Mercer," Ryan whispered. The voice gave a small laugh. "You've been searching for me since you were 11 years old." Ryan's hands shook. Maria looked terrified beside him. The voice continued through the speakers. "Your father asked too many questions. Just like you." Ryan shouted into the darkness. "What did you do to him?" Silence answered at first. Then he discovered the truth beneath Grayford. Ryan's breathing grew heavier. "What truth?" The voice ignored the question. Instead, Jonathan Mercer calmly said something even worse. "He's still here." Ryan felt ice spread through his body. Before he could respond, backup generators suddenly restored partial power to the prison. Dim emergency lights flickered back on. And that was when the screaming started. A prison guard came running down the hallway covered in blood. "They're escaping," he shouted. "Inmates." The guard shook his head wildly. "No, not inmates." Then Ryan heard it too. Heavy metal doors opening deep beneath the prison. Far underground. Doors that should never have opened. Daniel Reeves slowly stood inside his cell. Fear filled his face again. Real fear. "He opened the lower level," Daniel whispered. Maria frowned. "What lower level?" Daniel looked directly at Ryan. "The part of Grayford that doesn't exist on any map." Ryan immediately grabbed the cell keys and unlocked the door. Maria looked shocked. "Are you insane? We need answers." Daniel stepped out carefully, chains rattling around his wrists. For the first time, he didn't look dangerous. He looked terrified. The three of them moved through the prison corridors while guards fought to regain control above them. Emergency lights painted everything red. Somewhere far below, metal doors continued opening one after another. Clang, clang, clang. Like something deep underground was waking up. Daniel led them toward an old elevator hidden behind the prison laundry room. Ryan frowned. This elevator isn't on the building plans. Daniel nodded nervously. Jonathan built it years ago. Maria aimed her flashlight toward the rusted elevator doors. There were scratch marks all over the metal. Long, deep scratches. Like people had tried desperately to claw their way out. Ryan pressed the button. Nothing happened. Then a voice suddenly echoed from the darkness behind them. "You should have stayed away from this place." All three turned instantly. Malcolm Grady stood at the end of the hallway holding a shotgun. His prison uniform was stained with blood, but his hands were trembling badly. Ryan raised his weapon. "Drop it." Malcolm ignored him. Tears filled the guard's eyes. "You don't understand," he whispered. "He's been down there for 20 years. Maria frowned. "Who?" Malcolm looked toward the elevator slowly. Then the old elevator doors suddenly slid open by themselves. Cold air rushed out from below. Pitch-black darkness waited inside. And from somewhere deep underground, a man's voice calmly whispered, "Ryan." The voice coming from the elevator did not sound angry. That was the worst part. It sounded calm. Almost welcoming. "Ryan." Cold air poured out of the dark elevator shaft while the old cables creaked above them. Nobody moved. Daniel Reeves backed away slowly, shaking his head over and over. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." Malcolm Grady lowered the shotgun slightly. Sweat rolled down his face. Maria kept her gun raised. "Who's down there?" Nobody answered. Then the voice came again. "Come down, Detective Cole. It's time you learned the truth about your father." Ryan felt frozen in place. For 20 years, he had searched for answers about Samuel Cole's disappearance. Every dead end had somehow led back to Grayford Prison. And now the answers were waiting below them. Maria grabbed his arm tightly. "Ryan, this could be a trap." Daniel suddenly laughed nervously. "A trap," he said. "You still think this started tonight?" The emergency lights flickered again. Far above them, prison alarms continued screaming. Ryan looked at Malcolm. "You worked for Mercer all these years?" Malcolm's eyes filled with shame. "At first, I thought he was helping people," he whispered. "The prison was violent back then. Mercer said he could change dangerous inmates." Maria frowned. "By hiding people underground?" Malcolm nodded weakly. "He became obsessed. He started running secret experiments. Fear studies. Isolation studies. He wanted to learn how to control people completely." Ryan's stomach turned. The missing inmates. Malcolm looked away. He chose prisoners nobody would miss. Daniel suddenly shouted, "He chose guards too." Everyone looked at him. Daniel's breathing became uneven. "He watched us for years. Learned everything about us. If someone tried leaving," Daniel swallowed hard, "they disappeared." Maria stared at him. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Daniel looked broken now. "Because Jonathan Mercer never really lets anyone leave." The elevator lights suddenly flickered on by themselves. Ryan made his decision. "We're going down." Maria looked frustrated but followed him inside. Daniel hesitated. Then he quietly stepped in too. Only Malcolm remained outside. Ryan looked at him. "Coming." Malcolm stared into the darkness below. Fear filled his eyes. Then he slowly shook his head. "I spent 20 years helping that monster," he whispered. "I'm done running." Before anyone could stop him, Malcolm suddenly raised the shotgun toward himself. Boom! The blast echoed through the prison hallway. Maria flinched. Daniel closed his eyes tightly. Ryan hit the elevator button immediately. The doors slammed shut. Then the elevator descended. Lower, lower, lower. The prison noises above slowly disappeared. Soon there was only silence and the groaning sound of old metal cables. Finally, the elevator stopped. The doors slowly opened. Ryan stepped out first. The underground level looked nothing like a prison. It looked like a laboratory. Old computers lined the walls beside rusty hospital beds. Thick glass windows separated strange rooms filled with notes and files. Dust covered everything. But someone had still been there recently. Fresh footprints crossed the floor. Maria shined her flashlight across the room. Words were written across one wall in huge black letters. Fear makes people obey. Daniel began trembling violently. He made us memorize that sentence. Ryan walked deeper into the underground facility until he found a small office at the far end. The office door stood open. Inside sat an older man with gray hair and glasses. Jonathan Mercer. He looked almost peaceful sitting there beneath the dim lights. A chessboard rested on the desk beside him, and across from him sat another chair, occupied by a skeleton wearing an old detective's jacket. Ryan's breath stopped, because he recognized the badge instantly. Samuel Cole. His father. Maria whispered softly, "Oh my God!" Jonathan Mercer slowly looked up. "You finally made it." Ryan stormed forward angrily. "You killed him." Jonathan sighed quietly. "No. Your father refused to leave." Ryan stared at the skeleton in horror. Jonathan folded his hands calmly. "He discovered everything. The experiments. The disappearances. He wanted to expose Grayford." Jonathan's eyes darkened slightly. "But your father believed he could stop me alone." Ryan's fists clenched. "You kept him here for 20 years. Jonathan nodded slowly. He stayed loyal to his job until the very end. Daniel suddenly stepped backward nervously. "He's lying," he whispered. Jonathan turned toward him. And for the first time, Jonathan Mercer smiled. Daniel nearly collapsed from fear. "You always were weak, Daniel." Ryan raised his gun. "It's over." Jonathan looked strangely calm. "No," he said softly. "It ended years ago." Then he pressed a small button hidden beneath the desk. Suddenly red warning lights flashed across the underground level. Maria looked around wildly. "What did he do?" Jonathan leaned back in his chair. "I built this place to disappear forever if anyone uncovered it." Ryan's eyes widened. Self-destruct alarms echoed through the underground halls. Daniel panicked instantly. "We need to go." Steam burst from pipes overhead. The walls began shaking violently. Maria grabbed Ryan's arm. "Now." But Ryan stared at Jonathan Mercer. "You're coming with us." Jonathan slowly smiled again. "No, Detective Cole." Then he looked toward Samuel Cole's skeleton beside him. "Some people belong buried with their secrets." The ceiling suddenly cracked above them. Chunks of concrete crashed onto the floor. Daniel ran toward the elevator. Maria followed close behind. Ryan hesitated one final second. Then he grabbed his father's old badge from the skeleton's jacket and ran. The underground facility collapsed behind them as they raced for the elevator. Dust filled the air. Metal screamed around them. At the last second, the elevator doors slammed shut. The lift shot upward violently while the prison shook around them. Finally, the doors burst open onto the prison hallway above. Guards rushed toward them as the lower level collapsed beneath Grayford Prison forever. Hours later, emergency crews surrounded the prison grounds. The sun slowly rose over Ashwood. Grayford Prison was permanently shut down. Jonathan Mercer's body was never recovered. Neither were most of his records. But enough evidence survived to expose everything he had done. Daniel Reeves was transferred to a federal prison under heavy security. This time, he never smiled during another interrogation again. Emily Dawson reunited with her family. And Ryan finally stood alone beside his father's grave months later. Maria quietly approached him. "You okay?" Ryan looked down at the old detective badge in his hand. "For the first time in my life," he said softly, "I think I finally know the truth." Maria nodded gently. Then she looked toward the distant ruins of Grayford Prison. "They still haven't found Mercer." Ryan stayed silent for a moment. Cold wind moved through the cemetery trees. Then he quietly answered, "I know." Because deep down, Ryan could still hear Jonathan Mercer's final words echoing inside his head. "Some people belong buried with their secrets."